Sarah Mitchell had always believed in the power of a solid foundation. As one of the city's most respected architectural designers, she understood that every great structure required careful planning, precise measurements, and unwavering trust in the materials you chose to build with. For 8 years, she had believed that her marriage to David Mitchell was constructed on exactly those principles. Their life together seemed like something pulled straight from a luxury home magazine. The sprawling contemporary house in the exclusive Riverside Heights neighborhood was a testament to their combined success. His as a prominent investment banker, hers as the creative force behind some of the city's most stunning residential projects. Every room had been carefully curated, every detail thoughtfully chosen. The open concept living space with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, the gourmet kitchen where they'd hosted countless dinner parties, the master suite with its walk-in closets that housed David's collection of designer suits and Sarah's elegant dresses. But it was the spare room on the second floor, the one they'd always referred to as the future nursery, that held the most promise. For 3 long years, that room had remained empty, a symbol of their ongoing struggle with fertility treatments, miscarriages, and the crushing disappointment that followed each negative pregnancy test. Then finally, the miracle they'd been praying for arrived. 2 pink lines on a digital pregnancy test, clear as day. Sarah remembered that morning with crystal clarity, how she'd sat on the marble bathroom floor, staring at the result with tears streaming down her face. When she'd shown David, he'd actually dropped his coffee mug, sending ceramic shards across their pristine hardwood floors. Neither of them cared. He'd swept her into his arms, spinning her around their kitchen, while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "Finally, baby," he'd whispered against her hair, his own voice thick with emotion. "Our little family is finally going to be complete." The first trimester had been challenging but manageable. Morning sickness kept Sarah home more than usual, but David had been incredibly supportive, bringing her ginger tea in bed and taking over the grocery shopping. He'd even surprised her with a private consultation with the city's most sought-after nursery designer. They'd spent hours poring over color schemes and furniture catalogs, debating between contemporary minimalist and warm traditional styles. At 12 weeks pregnant, Sarah felt like she was finally emerging from the fog of early pregnancy symptoms. Her energy was returning, her appetite was back, and the constant nausea that had plagued her was beginning to fade. She was excited to throw herself back into her work, particularly a high-profile project designing a series of luxury condominiums downtown. But as her own health and spirits improved, she began to notice subtle changes in David that she'd previously attributed to his concern for her well-being. The late nights at the office, which had decreased during her worst weeks of morning sickness, suddenly ramped up again. Business trips that had been postponed were now being rescheduled with seemingly urgent priority. Most concerning was his newly acquired second phone, a sleek device he claimed was exclusively for international clients and important after-hours trading communications. "The markets never sleep, sweetheart," he'd explained when she'd questioned the constant buzzing and beeping from the device. "London, Tokyo, Sydney. I need to be accessible when opportunities arise. This way, I can keep work separate from our personal time." It sounded reasonable. David had always been ambitious, always climbing toward the next rung on the corporate ladder. His dedication to providing for their growing family was part of what she loved about him. But something felt different this time. The way he'd quickly silence the phone when she walked into a room. The way he'd suddenly developed a habit of taking important calls in his home office with the door closed. The way he seemed distracted during their conversations, as if part of his mind was always somewhere else. Sarah tried to push her concerns aside, telling herself she was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones, she reasoned, were making her hypersensitive to every little change in their routine. David was working hard to secure their financial future before the baby arrived. It was thoughtful and responsible, not suspicious. One evening in her 14th week, as they sat together on their oversized leather sectional watching a movie, Sarah decided to address her feelings directly. David had been scrolling through his work phone throughout the entire first hour of the film, occasionally typing quick responses with a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Is everything okay at work?" she asked, pausing the movie with the remote. You seem really busy lately, even more than usual. David looked up, his expression shifting to one of mild surprise as if he'd forgotten she was there. Oh yeah, everything's fine. Actually, it's better than fine. We're in the middle of closing a massive deal with a tech startup in Singapore. The numbers are incredible, Sarah. This could be the kind of commission that sets us up for life. He reached over and placed his hand on her growing belly, his touch warm and familiar. I want to make sure our little one never wants for anything. College funds, private schools, family vacations, the works. I'm just putting in the extra effort now so I can scale back once the baby arrives. His explanation was perfectly logical, delivered with the same confident smile that had charmed her 8 years ago when they'd first met at a mutual friend's housewarming party. Sarah wanted to believe him completely. She wanted to sink back into the comfortable certainty that her husband was simply working hard for their family's future. But as the days passed, the little inconsistencies began to pile up like hairline cracks in a foundation. The way he'd started dressing differently on certain days, not just his usual sharp business attire, but clothes that seemed chosen with extra care. The expensive cologne he'd recently started wearing, a scent she'd never helped him pick out. The credit card statements that arrived with charges from restaurants she'd never been to and boutiques she'd never shopped at. Most troubling was his sudden disinterest in the pregnancy milestones they'd previously shared with such enthusiasm. The monthly doctor's appointments he used to insist on attending were now obstacles to his busy schedule. The baby books they'd been reading together remained untouched on his nightstand. Even their conversations about nursery preparations became brief and distracted. Sarah found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, while David slept peacefully beside her, wondering if she was losing her mind or if the man she'd built her entire life with was slowly becoming a stranger. The baby would flutter and kick inside her as if sensing her anxiety, and she'd place her hand protectively over her stomach. It's going to be okay, little one, she'd whisper in the darkness. Mommy's probably just being silly. But deep down, in the place where architects learn to trust their instincts about structural integrity, Sarah was beginning to suspect that the foundation of her marriage might not be as solid as she'd always believed. And foundations, she knew better than anyone, were not something you could afford to ignore when they started showing signs of weakness. The question was she brave enough to take a closer look at what might be lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life? The discovery came on a Wednesday morning, innocent and devastating in its simplicity. Sarah was working from her home office, reviewing blueprints for a luxury hotel project, when a notification popped up on her laptop screen. Their shared family, calendar, the digital backbone of their organized life together, was alerting her to an upcoming appointment. She glanced at the notification absently, expecting to see a reminder about her next prenatal checkup or David's dentist appointment. Instead, her blood turned to ice as she read the entry scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. Baby's first ultrasound, Genesis Imaging Center. Sarah's hands froze over her keyboard. Her own anatomy scan wasn't scheduled until the following week, and it certainly wasn't at the Genesis Imaging Center. She knew that facility well. It was the most exclusive prenatal imaging center in the city, catering to celebrities and wealthy clients who wanted luxury ultrasound experiences with 3D imaging, private suites, and champagne celebrations afterward. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clicked on the appointment details. The entry was created by David's email account. The location was confirmed: Genesis Imaging Center on Parkland Avenue. But there was something else, a note in the comments section that made her vision blur. Can't wait to see our little miracle. Beautiful, this will be perfect, dear our little miracle. The same endearment he'd been using for their own baby. Sarah's chair creaked as she leaned back, her hand instinctively moving to her 15-week bump. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. She stared at the screen, her architect's mind, trying to process the structural impossibility of what she was seeing. David was taking someone else to a baby scan, someone who was also pregnant, someone he was calling beautiful. The rational part of her brain scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe it was for his sister. though she lived across the country and wasn't pregnant. Maybe it was for a colleague, though that seemed unlikely given the intimate tone. Maybe it was a mistake, a calendar sync error from someone else's account, but deep in her gut, in the same place where she instinctively knew when a building design had fatal flaws, Sarah knew the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This was evidence of a parallel life she'd never suspected existed. Her fingers trembling, she opened a private browser window and searched for the Genesis Imaging Center. The website was elegant and sophisticated, filled with testimonials from satisfied clients and photos of luxurious appointment suites. The pricing made her gasp. A basic 3D ultrasound package started at $800, with premium experiences running over $2,000. This wasn't a routine medical appointment. This was a celebration, an experience, a memory-making event. The kind of thing you did when you were excited about a pregnancy, when you wanted to share a special moment with someone you loved. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. Working. Late tonight, sweetheart. Big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you both. Both. He'd written both, meaning her and the baby, but now she wondered how many boths existed in David Mitchell's carefully compartmentalized life. She spent the rest of the day in a strange, dissociated state, going through the motions of work calls and client meetings while her mind raced through possibilities. By evening, she'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. When David came home at nearly midnight, claiming exhaustion from his presentation preparation, Sarah was waiting in their living room, with a cup of herbal tea, the picture of a supportive pregnant wife. "How did the prep go?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Brutal," he said, loosening his tie with the practiced motion of a man who'd been performing this routine for years. "The Singapore deal is more complicated than we initially thought. Legal is requesting additional documentation. Compliance is raising concerns about international regulations. It's a nightmare." He moved to kiss her forehead, and she caught a whiff of perfume that definitely wasn't hers. Something floral and young with notes she didn't recognize. She forced herself not to pull away. "That sounds stressful," she murmured. "Are you going to be working late the rest of the week?" "Probably," David said, already heading toward the stairs. "Actually, I have a crucial meeting Thursday afternoon that might run long. Might not be home until evening." Thursday afternoon. 2 p.m. Genesis Imaging Center. "That's fine," Sarah heard herself say. "I have some project site visits scheduled anyway." She waited until she heard the shower running upstairs before she opened her laptop and began the research that would change everything. She started with David's credit card statements, accounts she'd always had access to but had never felt the need to scrutinize. She told herself she was looking for evidence that would disprove her suspicions, charges that would reveal an innocent explanation for the calendar entry. Instead, she found a pattern of deception so extensive it took her breath away. Restaurant charges from places they'd never been together, jewelry purchases from stores she'd never visited, hotel charges in the city on nights when he'd claimed to be working late at the office, charges from boutique clothing stores, expensive florists, and a particularly damning recurring monthly charge to something called Riverside Luxury Apartments. The Riverside Luxury Apartments. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard as she pulled up their website. It was exactly what it sounded like. High-end furnished apartments available for short-term leases, popular with executives and wealthy individuals who needed temporary housing in the city. She found the floor plans, the amenities, the pricing. A one-bedroom unit with river views started at $4,500 per month. The kind of place you might set up someone you wanted to keep comfortable and close, but separate from your real life. By 3 a.m., Sarah had constructed a timeline of betrayal that was as precise and devastating as any architectural blueprint she'd ever drafted. The luxury apartment lease had started 6 months ago. The restaurant and jewelry charges correlated with a pattern, always on days when David claimed to have late meetings or work dinners. The hotel charges were from afternoons when he was supposed to be in client presentations, but it was the final piece of evidence that shattered whatever remained of her denial. Buried in the credit card statements was a charge from 3 months ago. Storks Landing Fertility Clinic, $2,847. Sarah, New Storks Landing. It was where she and David had done their own fertility treatments. It was where they'd experienced their previous miscarriages, where they'd finally achieved their current pregnancy. It was a place filled with hope and heartbreak, with desperate couples willing to try anything to have a baby. David had taken someone else there. He'd paid for someone else's fertility treatments while she'd been struggling with morning sickness and celebrating their own miracle pregnancy. She sat back in her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth to keep from screaming. The scope of his betrayal was architectural in its complexity, a complete secondary life built with the same attention to detail he'd once devoted to their marriage. The apartment, the dinners, the medical treatments, and now the celebratory ultrasound. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was building a replacement for her. The baby kicked hard, as if reacting to her elevated heart rate and the adrenaline flooding her system. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, feeling the solid reality of her child, the one piece of this nightmare that was unquestionably real and hers. "It's going to be okay, little one," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "Mommy's going to figure this out." But as she stared at the evidence spread across her screen, months of lies documented in black and white, Sarah realized that figuring it out was only the first step. The real question was what she was going to do with the truth once she had it. And as the architect of what she'd thought was a solid marriage, she was beginning to understand that sometimes the only way to deal with a fundamentally flawed foundation was to tear the whole structure down and start over. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in her home office as dawn broke over the river, surrounded by printouts of credit card statements, calendar screenshots, and notes she'd made in her precise architectural handwriting. The evidence was damning, but evidence alone wouldn't give her what she needed: control over the situation. By 7 a.m., she'd made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, she wasn't going to confront David privately. Private confrontations could be denied, explained away, or spun into her being the crazy hormonal pregnant wife. She needed witnesses and consequences. Second, she was going to take back control of their finances before he realized she knew. If he was funding a second life with their marital assets, she was going to stop the bleeding immediately. Third, she was going to that ultrasound appointment. Not to cause a scene, but to see the full scope of what she was dealing with. To put a face to the woman who was carrying what she now suspected might be her husband's child. Her first call was to Marcus Chen, their financial advisor and family friend who'd handled their accounts for 5 years. Sarah had always liked Marcus's straightforward approach and his genuine concern for their family's security. "Sarah, wonderful to hear from you," Marcus said when she reached him at his office. "How are you feeling? David mentioned you've been having a tough first trimester." "I'm much better, thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "Actually, I'm calling about our accounts. With the baby coming, I want to make sure I have independent access to everything in case of emergency." "Of course, that's very sensible. What specifically did you need?" "I'd like to set up alerts on all account activity, and I want to understand our current financial picture completely. Also, I want to establish a separate account that only I have access to, funded from our joint savings." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, is everything all right? This sounds like you're protecting yourself from something." She closed her eyes, grateful for his perceptiveness and discretion. "I'm just being cautious, Marcus. Let's leave it at that for now." "Understood. I'll have everything ready by end of business today, and Sarah, if you need anything else, anything at all, you call me directly." Her second call was to her best friend Rachel, a successful divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases. They'd known each other since college, and Rachel had always been Sarah's voice of reason during difficult times. "I need to see you," Sarah said without preamble when Rachel answered. "Today, it's about David." Rachel's tone immediately shifted from casual to professional. "Come to my office at 2 p.m. and Sarah, don't discuss this with anyone else until we talk." The hours, until her appointment crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah went through the motions of her morning routine, making David coffee and listening to him complain about his stressful day ahead, while she studied his face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. He seemed perfectly normal, loving, distracted by work, concerned about her well-being. "You look tired, sweetheart," he said, kissing her forehead before grabbing his briefcase. "Make sure you rest today. Growing our baby is hard work." Our baby. She wondered if he used the same possessive pronoun when talking to his other woman about her pregnancy. At Rachel's office, Sarah spread her evidence across the conference table like a general planning a military campaign. Rachel reviewed each document with the cold precision of a surgeon, making notes and asking pointed questions. "The pattern is clear," Rachel finally said, leaning back in her chair. "He's not just having an affair, Sarah. He's maintaining a completely separate household. The apartment lease, the medical expenses, the regular charges. This is systematic financial infidelity on a massive scale." "What are my options?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Several, but they depend on what you want to achieve. Do you want to try to save the marriage? Do you want a divorce? Do you want to just stop the financial bleeding while you figure things out?" Sarah touched her belly, feeling the baby's reassuring movement. "I want to protect my child and myself. I want to stop him from draining our assets to fund his other life. And I want him to face consequences for what he's done." Rachel smiled grimly. "Then we're going for the nuclear option. I'm going to file for an emergency restraining order that will freeze all marital assets and grant you exclusive use of the house. But first I need more evidence. I need you to confirm that he's actually at this ultrasound appointment tomorrow. I was planning to go there anyway." "Good, but not alone. I'm going to arrange for a private investigator to document everything. Photos, video, witnesses, the works. If we're going to blow up his life, we're going to do it properly." That evening, Sarah found herself studying David with new eyes as they shared what would be their last dinner together as a married couple, though he didn't know it yet. He seemed excited about something, more animated than he'd been in weeks. "I think the Singapore deal is going to come together faster than expected," he said, refilling her water glass with attentive care. "The legal issues are resolving, and the client is eager to move forward. This could be exactly the financial boost we need before the baby arrives." "That's wonderful," Sarah replied, marveling at how easily the lies rolled off his tongue. "Will you be celebrating with the team when it closes?" "Probably just a quiet dinner somewhere nice. Nothing too exciting." He reached across to touch her hand. "I want to save the real celebrating for our family milestones. Speaking of which, how are you feeling about your ultrasound next week? Are you getting excited to see our little one?" The casual cruelty of the question took her breath away. He was asking about their baby's ultrasound while planning to attend another woman's ultrasound the very next day. "Very excited," she managed. "I can't wait to see how much the baby has grown." "It's going to be incredible," David said, his eyes warm with what appeared to be genuine love and anticipation. "Our first real look at our child." But not his first look at a child, Sarah thought. Tomorrow he'd be getting his first look at another baby, another future, another life he was building in the shadows of their marriage. That night, as David slept peacefully beside her, Sarah lay awake making final preparations for the confrontation that would shatter their world. She'd transferred a substantial amount to her new private account. She'd given Rachel everything needed to file the emergency motion. She'd confirmed the appointment with the private investigator. Most importantly, she'd chosen her outfit for tomorrow's showdown, a beautiful navy blue maternity dress that David had bought for her, telling her how radiant she looked in it. She wanted to look stunning when she walked into that ultrasound appointment. She wanted both David and his mistress to see exactly what he was throwing away. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing the momentous day ahead. Sarah placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "Tomorrow, little one, Mommy is going to take control of our future." She had no idea that the woman she was about to confront was carrying a secret that would make the betrayal even more devastating than she could have imagined. Thursday arrived gray and cold, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for what would either be the most humiliating or empowering day of her life. She dressed with the care of a warrior donning armor. The navy blue maternity dress David had chosen for her, subtle makeup that emphasized her natural beauty, and her grandmother's pearl earrings for strength. At 1:30 p.m., she met private investigator Janet Torres at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Genesis Imaging Center. Janet was a petite woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the unremarkable appearance that made her perfect for surveillance work. "I'll be positioned across the street with a telephoto lens," Janet explained, showing Sarah the sophisticated camera equipment. "I'll document their arrival, their interaction, everything. You go in 15 minutes after they arrive. That gives them time to settle in and gives me time to get the establishing shots." Sarah's hands were shaking as she sipped her herbal tea. "What if I can't go through with it?" "Then you walk away and we figure out another approach," Janet said firmly. "But from what your attorney told me about the evidence you've gathered, this man has been systematically defrauding your marriage for months. You have every right to see what you're dealing with." At 1:45 p.m., Janet's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and nodded to Sarah. "They're here. Black Mercedes, license plate matches the one from your husband's car registration. He's helping a young woman out of the passenger seat. Blonde hair, early 20s, very obviously pregnant." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Blonde hair, early 20s. Somehow she'd pictured someone older, more sophisticated. The reality of her husband's betrayal suddenly became sharper and more painful. "She's beautiful," Janet continued, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "And she looks happy." He's got his hand on her back, very attentive. They're walking into the building now. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "How long should I wait?" 10 more minutes. Give them time to check in and get settled." Those 10 minutes felt like hours. Sarah's mind raced through possible scenarios. What she would say, how they would react, whether she had the strength to face not just her husband's betrayal, but the living, breathing evidence of it growing inside another woman's body. At exactly 2 p.m., Sarah walked through the frosted glass doors of the Genesis Imaging Center. The waiting room was exactly as luxurious as the website had promised. Soft lighting, plush seating, and the kind of hushed, reverent atmosphere that made pregnancy feel like a sacred experience rather than a medical condition. And there they were. David sat in a corner chair, his arm around a stunning young woman with platinum blonde hair and cornflower blue eyes. She was wearing a flowing floral dress that accentuated her obvious pregnancy. Sarah estimated she was about as far along as herself. They were looking at something on David's phone, both of them smiling and whispering intimately. The woman was even more beautiful than Janet had described. She had the kind of ethereal, youthful beauty that made Sarah suddenly feel ancient at 32. But more than her looks, it was her demeanor that cut Sarah to the core. She looked radiant, excited, completely in love. She looked exactly like Sarah had looked during her own early pregnancy appointments with David. Sarah chose a seat with a clear view of them and waited. Her heart was pounding so loudly, she was sure the entire waiting room could hear it. "Hello?" Woman was laughing softly at something David was showing her on his phone, and he was gazing at her with the same tender expression he'd once reserved for Sarah. It was David who spotted her first. She watched his face transform in real time, from contentment to confusion to pure, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his cheek so quickly she thought he might faint. His phone slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. "Sarah?" he whispered, the word barely audible across the quiet room. The blonde woman looked up at the sound of her name, following David's horrified gaze to where Sarah sat. Her smile faltered as she took in Sarah's obvious pregnancy, and the way David was staring at her like she was a ghost. "David?" the woman said, her voice sweet and uncertain. "Who is this?" Sarah rose slowly from her chair, her hand instinctively going to her belly in a protective gesture. She walked across the waiting room with measured steps, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Other couples in the waiting room began to sense the tension, conversations dying as all eyes turned to watch the unfolding drama. "Hello, David," Sarah said, her voice remarkably steady. "I thought you had a presentation this afternoon." David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His face had gone from pale to a sickly green color. The woman beside him looked between them with growing alarm and confusion. "I'm sorry," the blonde said, standing up with one hand on her own pregnant belly. "I think there's been some mistake." "David," Who is this woman? Sarah turned to look at her directly, taking in the youth and beauty and obvious pregnancy of her husband's mistress. There's no mistake, she said clearly. I'm Sarah Mitchell, David's wife. The word wife dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. The blonde woman actually staggered backward, one hand flying to her mouth. Wife? She gasped. David, you told me you were divorced. You said the papers were finalized months ago. Kimberly, I can explain. David finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you brought your pregnant mistress to a baby. Scan while your pregnant wife sits at home, Sarah said, her architectural precision extending to her words. What exactly am I misunderstanding? Kimberly, so that was her name, was staring at Sarah's belly with dawning horror. You're pregnant too? She whispered. 15 weeks, Sarah confirmed. Same as you, I'd guess, based on your appointment time. The math was devastating and immediate. David had gotten both women pregnant at virtually the same time. This wasn't a man torn between two loves. This was a man living two completely separate lives with surgical precision. David Mitchell? A cheerful technician in pink scrubs appeared at the entrance to the appointment area. We're ready for you, and Kimberly for your ultrasound. The bizarre normalcy of the announcement in the middle of the emotional carnage made the situation even more surreal. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Kimberly was crying silently, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Other couples in the waiting room were openly staring now, some holding up their phones to record the unfolding drama. I think, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence, that appointment is going to need to be rescheduled. She reached into her purse and pulled out a large manila envelope, holding it out to David. This is for you. What is it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. A court order, Sarah replied. Emergency restraining order, to be precise. It freezes all our joint accounts effective immediately. It also grants me exclusive use of our house. You're legally prohibited from the property as of right now. David stared at the envelope like it might explode. Sarah, please, we can talk about this at home. No, we can't, she said firmly. Because you won't be coming home. Not today. Not ever. She turned to Kimberly, who was still crying and staring at both of them in shock. I'm sorry you were dragged into this. I don't think you knew about me any more than I knew about you. But you should know. The money he's been spending on you, the apartment he's leasing for you, all of it comes from our joint accounts, our marital assets. As of today, that stops. The technician in pink scrubs was still standing there, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Should I reschedule the appointment? She asked uncertainly. Yes, Sarah said. I think Mr. Mitchell is going to be far too busy dealing with legal matters to attend any baby appointments today. She looked at David one last time. The man she'd loved for 8 years. The man she'd built a life with. The man who'd destroyed everything they had while promising her the world. He looked broken, humiliated, caught in a web of lies that was finally collapsing around him. Goodbye, David, she said quietly. And with that, she walked out of the Genesis Imaging Center, leaving behind the wreckage of her marriage and the man who had single-handedly demolished the life they'd built together. Outside, the cold air hit her face like a slap, and she realized she was crying. But underneath the tears was something else, something that felt surprisingly like relief. Janet Torres appeared at her elbow, camera equipment slung over her shoulder. I got everything, she said quietly. Photos, video, audio through the window. Your attorney is going to be very happy. Sarah nodded, one hand on her belly where their baby was kicking frantically, responding to her elevated heart rate and emotional state. It's okay, little one, she whispered. Mommy just took control of our future. But even as she said it, Sarah had no idea that the biggest shock was still to come. The aftermath of the ultrasound confrontation moved with the swift brutality of a controlled demolition. Within hours, David's carefully constructed double life crumbled under the weight of legal documentation, frozen assets, and the viral video. that someone in the waiting room had uploaded to social media. Sarah spent that evening in her house, legally hers alone now, surrounded by boxes of David's belongings that the court order required him to collect within 48 hours. Rachel had been right about the nuclear option. The emergency restraining order had been granted based on the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud, and David found himself locked out of not just his home, but his own bank accounts. Her phone had been ringing nonstop. Reporters who'd gotten wind of the story, friends who'd seen the social media posts, David's business associates, who were suddenly very concerned about his judgment and stability. Sarah had turned it off after the fifth call from a gossip blogger wanting an exclusive interview about the ultrasound showdown that's breaking the internet. But it was the call from Rachel at 9 p.m. that changed everything. "Sarah, we need to talk," Rachel said, her voice tense with an energy Sarah had never heard before. "Can I come over? I have news about Kimberly Morrison. That's your husband's girlfriend's full name, by the way." 20 minutes later, Rachel sat in Sarah's living room with a thick file folder and an expression that mixed triumph with concern. "My investigator did some digging on Kimberly after today's events," Rachel began. "What we found is, well, it changes everything." Sarah poured herself a cup of tea with hands that were already starting to shake. "What did you find?" "Kimberly Morrison isn't just some young woman David seduced. She's the daughter of Jonathan Morrison." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Jonathan Morrison was the CEO of Morrison Capital, one of the largest investment firms in the country. He was also David's biggest client and the source of nearly 40% of his annual commissions. "David's been having an affair with his most important client's daughter?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "It gets worse," Rachel continued grimly. "According to public records, Kimberly Morrison is 22 years old. She graduated from college just last year. When this affair started, based on the apartment lease and credit card records, she had just turned 21. Sarah felt sick. He was targeting a girl barely out of college. A girl whose father controls David's career and financial future. But here's the part that's going to destroy him completely. I don't think Jonathan Morrison knows about the relationship. Kimberly has been living in that apartment under an assumed name. The lease is in the name Kim Morris, close enough to her real name to feel natural, but different enough to hide from Daddy." Rachel pulled out several documents from her folder. "David has been playing an incredibly dangerous game, Sarah. He's been systematically lying to both you and Kimberly, but he's also been committing what could be career suicide. If Jonathan Morrison finds out that David got his daughter pregnant, he'll destroy him," Sarah finished. "Morrison has that kind of power in the financial world." "Exactly. But there's one more thing." Rachel's expression grew even more serious. "The private investigator spoke with some of Kimberly's friends. Apparently David told her that his wife, you, had been trying to trap him in the marriage by getting pregnant deliberately. He said you were manipulative and controlling, and that he'd been trying to leave you for months, but you threatened suicide if he abandoned you while pregnant." The cruelty of the lies took Sarah's breath away. "He made me sound like a monster. He made you both sound like monsters to justify what he was doing. Kimberly apparently felt sorry for him, thought she was saving him from an abusive marriage. Meanwhile, he was telling you that work stress was making him distant." Sarah's phone, which had been silent on the coffee table, suddenly buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed David's number. "Don't answer it," Rachel advised quickly. But before Sarah could stop it, the phone buzzed again with a text message. Then another. And another. Against Rachel's advice, Sarah grabbed the phone and read the messages. "Sarah, please, I can explain everything. I love you. I love our baby. This is all a terrible mistake. Kimberly means nothing to me. She's just a confused kid. You are my wife. You are my family. I'm at the Marriott downtown, room 847. Please come so we can talk privately. I can fix this. The Singapore deal is real, Sarah. I was going to end things with Kimberly once I had the financial security. Everything I did was for US." Sarah stared at the messages, marveling at how David could still be lying even now, when his entire world had collapsed. She showed them to Rachel, who shook her head in disgust. "He's still manipulating," Rachel said. "Even now he's trying to control the narrative." But it was the final message that arrived as they were talking that contained the most devastating revelation of all. "Sarah, I just spoke to Morrison. He knows everything now. My career is over. Kimberly is refusing to see me. Please don't abandon me too. I need you now more than ever." Rachel and Sarah stared at the message in silence. Then Rachel began to laugh, not with humor, but with the dark satisfaction of watching justice unfold. "He just confessed to everything in writing," Rachel said. "He's admitted that Morrison knows about the affair, which confirms it was secret. He's admitted that Kimberly was more than just a casual relationship. And he's basically begging you to save him from the consequences of his own choices." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered it. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was older, refined, and absolutely furious. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Jonathan Morrison. I believe you're married to the man who has been manipulating and exploiting my daughter." Sarah met Rachel's eyes, seeing her own shock reflected there. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm calling to inform you that your husband has been terminated from his position, effective immediately. He will also be blacklisted from every major financial firm in this region. But more importantly, I want you to know that my daughter is safe. She's home with her mother and me, and she won't be seeing David Mitchell ever again." "How did you find out?" Sarah asked. "Kimberly called me after what happened today. She was hysterical, talking about being lied to and manipulated. It took me most of the evening to get the full story out of her." Morrison's voice was ice cold. "Your husband targeted my daughter when she was still in college. He told her elaborate lies about your marriage being over, about you being unstable, about him being trapped. He got her pregnant and promised her a future that was built entirely on deception." Sarah felt a moment of unexpected sympathy for Kimberly. "Is she okay?" "She will be. She's young and she has family support. But I want you to know that David Mitchell will face consequences for what he's done to both of you. I'm considering filing charges for fraud and financial elder abuse." She signed several documents related to that apartment lease, based on his lies about his marital status. After Morrison hung up, Sarah and Rachel sat in stunned silence. "It's over," Rachel finally said. "David has lost everything. His job, his client base, his reputation, his family, and his access to Kimberly. The affair that he thought was going to be his escape plan has become his complete destruction." Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling her baby's reassuring kicks. "What happens now?" "Now you heal," Rachel said simply. "You prepare for your baby. You rebuild your life on your own terms. And you watch David Mitchell face the consequences of trying to have everything and losing it all." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone buzzed with one final text from David. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, everything. Kimberly won't see me. Morrison is destroying me. You're the only good thing left in my life, Sarah. Please, I'm begging you. Don't let this be the end of us." Sarah read the message, then deleted it without responding. She blocked David's number, and then she turned to Rachel with a clear, steady voice. "I want to proceed with the divorce immediately. I want full custody, and I want every asset we're entitled to. David Mitchell made his choices. Now, he gets to live with them." 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell gave birth to a healthy baby girl, in the same hospital where she'd once dreamed of David being by her side. Instead, she was surrounded by Rachel, her mother, and Janet Torres, who had become an unexpected friend during the legal proceedings. David Mitchell never saw his daughter. By the time she was born, he had left the city entirely, his career in ruins and his reputation destroyed. Kimberly Morrison had quietly ended her pregnancy and returned to graduate school in another state. Supported by her family's resources and desire for privacy, Sarah named her daughter Emma Grace. Emma for whole, and Grace for the unexpected gift of strength she'd found in herself during the darkest period of her life. As she held her baby for the first time, looking into eyes that were thankfully Hers alone and not David's, Sarah whispered. It's just you and me now, baby girl, and we're going to build something beautiful together. The foundation was finally solid.